Just a frail old man at the ATM when three armed robbers struck, until 30 years of Army Ranger training kicked in, and what happened next left everyone speechless. It was 2:47 p.m. on a quiet Thursday afternoon at First National Bank in downtown Phoenix, Arizona. The desert sun blazed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the polished marble floor of the banking hall. The usual afternoon lull had settled over the branch, a handful of customers conducting routine business, tellers quietly processing transactions, and the soft hum of air conditioning fighting against the Arizona heat. At ATM station number 3, near the back corner of the lobby, stood 68-year-old Frank Morrison. To anyone watching, he appeared to be exactly what he seemed, a retired grandfather struggling with modern technology. His thin frame was hunched slightly forward as he squinted at the ATM screen through reading glasses that had seen better days. His weathered hands, marked with liver spots and the kind of permanent stains that come from decades of manual labor, fumbled with the buttons as he tried to check his modest Social Security balance. His clothes told the story of a man living on a fixed income. A faded red flannel shirt with frayed cuffs, worn Levi's jeans with patches at the knees, and scuffed work boots that had probably been resoled multiple times. A simple baseball cap with a generic veteran logo sat askew on his thinning gray hair, the kind of hat you could buy at any gas station for $9.99. Frank moved slowly, deliberately, the way elderly people do when they're afraid of making mistakes with unfamiliar technology. He had to lean close to read the screen, squinting at the small print and muttering under his breath about how banks made everything so complicated these days. Behind him, a well-dressed businessman in a $2,000 suit checked his Rolex impatiently and sighed audibly, clearly annoyed at being stuck behind someone who was taking so long with such a simple transaction. A young woman in yoga clothes rolled her eyes and pulled out her phone, texting someone about how some old people shouldn't be allowed to use ATMs during business hours. What none of them knew, what Frank Morrison had never told anyone in his quiet retirement community, not his neighbors, not even his own children, was that those same weathered hands had once been among the deadliest weapons in the United States Army. Those eyes that now struggled to read ATM instructions had once been trained to spot enemy movement from impossible distances in the jungles of Vietnam. That mind that seemed confused by modern banking technology had once planned and executed raids behind enemy lines that were still classified 40 years later. Frank Morrison wasn't just any veteran. He was a former Army Ranger, 75th Ranger Regiment, with 3 tours in Vietnam and commendations that were locked away in a Pentagon vault somewhere. For 30 years, he had been the kind of soldier that other soldiers whispered about in reverent tones. The kind of man who could disappear into enemy territory for weeks and emerge with intelligence that changed the course of battles. The kind of warrior who had earned his Ranger tab through trials that would break most men, and then proved worthy of it in the crucible of actual combat. But that was a lifetime ago. Now he was just Frank, the quiet old man from apartment 3B who collected his mail at the same time every day, and sometimes forgot to turn off his television at night. He'd buried that part of himself so deep that sometimes he wondered if it had all been a dream. The arthritis in his joints was real enough, the result of too many parachute jumps and forced marches. The hearing loss in his left ear was a permanent reminder of a mortar explosion outside Da Nang in 1971. The nightmares were less frequent now, but they still came sometimes, leaving him sitting on the edge of his bed at 3 a.m., wondering why he had survived when so many good men hadn't. As Frank struggled with his transaction, punching in his PIN for the 3rd time because his fingers weren't as steady as they used to be, the bank's afternoon calm was about to be shattered in a way that would bring all those buried memories roaring back to the surface. At exactly 2:49 p.m., the front door of First National Bank exploded inward as 3 men burst through the entrance with the coordinated precision of a military assault team. They moved with purpose and speed, each one knowing exactly where to go and what to do. The leader, a tall man with dead eyes and a spider web tattoo crawling up his neck, carried a modified AR-15 assault rifle that he swept across the lobby like a deadly pendulum. His two companions flanked him, one heading toward the teller stations with a sawed-off shotgun, the other moving to secure the customer area with a .45 caliber pistol held in a practiced two-handed grip. "Everybody on the ground. Now. This is a robbery." The leader's voice boomed through the marble-walled space, echoing off the high ceiling and froze every person in the bank like deer caught in headlights. "Hands where I can see them! Nobody moves! Nobody dies!" The transformation of the peaceful bank into a war zone happened in seconds. Customers screamed and dropped to the floor, some of them covering their children with their own bodies. The businessman who had been so impatient with Frank dove behind a decorative plant. His expensive suit forgotten as pure survival instinct took over. The yoga instructor who had been texting about slow old people was now hyperventilating behind a marble pillar, her phone clattering across the floor. Bank employees activated silent alarms with trembling fingers while trying to appear calm and compliant. The lead teller, a woman named Sarah who had worked at the bank for 15 years and thought she'd seen everything, felt her training desert her as she stared down the barrel of an assault rifle wielded by a man whose eyes showed no mercy, no hesitation, no humanity at all. In the back corner by ATM Station 3, Frank Morrison stood frozen for a moment, his hand still extended toward the machine's keypad. To the casual observer, he looked like any other terrified elderly victim, a soft target caught in the wrong place at the wrong time. His body language was that of a confused old man trying to process what was happening, his movements slow and uncertain as he turned to face the chaos erupting in the bank lobby. But something else was happening inside Frank's mind, something that the years of quiet retirement couldn't suppress. The sound of the door exploding open had triggered responses that had been dormant but never dead. The sharp crack of boots on marble became the sound of enemy soldiers moving through a village. The shouted commands in English were suddenly being processed by a brain that had once cataloged every threat, every potential weapon, every tactical advantage in life or death situations. 30 years of training and 3 tours of combat experience don't simply vanish because a man gets old. They go underground, waiting. And now, as Frank's eyes swept the lobby with a clarity that hadn't been there moments before, that training was surfacing like a submarine breaching the ocean. The leader of the robbery crew was making the classic mistake of assuming that age equals helplessness, that gray hair means defenselessness. He glanced at Frank dismissively, just another harmless old man who would cower in the corner until this was over. But Frank Morrison was conducting his own tactical assessment, his mind automatically cataloging details that 40 years of civilian life couldn't erase. 3 hostiles, armed with serious firepower but moving with the overconfidence of men who had never faced real opposition. The leader was carrying his rifle too casually, relying on its intimidation factor rather than maintaining proper firing stance. The man with the shotgun had positioned himself poorly, with limited fields of fire and his back to a potential flanking route. The third gunman was focused entirely on the customers and staff, not maintaining proper situational awareness of the environment. Most importantly, they had made the fatal error of assuming that everyone in the bank was a sheep. They hadn't counted on there being a wolf among the flock. "You, old man." The leader's voice cut through Frank's tactical analysis. "Get over here with the rest of them. Move your ass before I put a bullet in you." The assault rifle swung toward Frank, its barrel a black eye of death that had probably claimed lives before this day. The gunman's finger was on the trigger, his body language indicating that he wouldn't hesitate to kill anyone who didn't comply immediately with his demands. To everyone watching, Frank Morrison looked like he was simply complying with the gunman's orders. He raised his hands in apparent surrender, his movements slow and non-threatening. His face showed the appropriate level of fear and confusion that you'd expect from an elderly civilian caught in a violent crime. He began shuffling toward the center of the lobby where other hostages were huddled on the floor, his gait uncertain and his breathing labored as if the stress was too much for his old heart. But Frank's apparent compliance was actually something far more dangerous. It was a ranger moving into position. Every step was calculated, every movement designed to close distance while appearing harmless. His eyes, which seemed unfocused with fear, were actually mapping the room with the precision of a military operation. 3 steps to the nearest cover, 6 feet to the dropped security guard's radio, 12 feet to the emergency exit that the gunman hadn't secured. The leader of the robbery crew was growing impatient. "Faster, Grandpa. I'm not going to ask again." To emphasize his point, he fired a single shot into the ceiling, the deafening crack of the rifle sending marble dust raining down and causing several hostages to scream in terror. The bullet hole in the ornate ceiling was a clear message. These men were serious, and they were willing to kill. But for Frank Morrison, the sound of gunfire didn't trigger fear. It triggered muscle memory that was decades old, but still perfectly intact. Suddenly, he wasn't a 68-year-old retiree in a Phoenix bank. He was Staff Sergeant Frank Morrison, 75th Ranger Regiment, and he was behind enemy lines with civilians in danger and 3 hostile combatants who had just made the mistake of revealing their positions. The transformation happened in milliseconds. Frank's shuffling old man gait disappeared, replaced by the controlled movement of a predator. His uncertain posture straightened into the alert stance of a warrior. His confused expression hardened into the focused intensity of a man who had killed before and was prepared to do it again if necessary. When Frank moved, it was with a speed and precision that defied his apparent age and frailty. 30 years of muscle memory erupted from dormancy as he launched himself toward the nearest gunman, the one with the pistol who had been focused on corralling hostages and had made the fatal mistake of getting too close to what he thought was a harmless old man. Frank's first move was a classic ranger disarmament technique, executed with the same efficiency he had used in the jungles of Southeast Asia. His left hand swept up to trap the gunman's weapon arm, while his right hand drove a devastating elbow strike into the man's solar plexus. The blow was delivered with the full force of a lifetime of training, hitting with surgical precision at the nerve cluster that would temporarily paralyze the diaphragm and drop a man like a stone. The gunman's eyes went wide with shock and confusion as his body betrayed him. One moment he had been in control, wielding life and death over a room full of terrified civilians. The next moment he was gasping for air that wouldn't come, his weapon arm trapped by hands that felt like steel cables despite their aged appearance. Frank followed through with a knee strike to the man's wrist that sent the pistol skittering across the marble floor, its metallic clatter lost in the chaos that was beginning to erupt throughout the bank lobby. The second gunman, the one with the sawed-off shotgun, spun toward the commotion just in time to see what looked like a senior citizen dismantling his partner with the ruthless efficiency of a special forces operative. His brain struggled to process what he was seeing. This couldn't be happening. Old men didn't move like that, didn't fight like that, didn't pose this kind of threat. But his training in armed robbery hadn't prepared him for facing a former Army Ranger, and his hesitation cost him the initiative. Frank was already moving, using the first gunman's body as a human shield, while simultaneously advancing on the second threat. His movements were a textbook example of close-quarters combat, every step and strike flowing into the next, with the deadly grace of a man who had spent years perfecting the art of violence. The shotgun boomed, but Frank had anticipated the shot and was already diving behind a marble pillar as wood and concrete exploded where he had been standing a fraction of a second earlier. The leader of the robbery crew was screaming orders that his remaining partner couldn't follow, his carefully planned operation dissolving into chaos as he tried to track a target that moved like smoke and struck like lightning. Frank Morrison was no longer pretending to be a confused old man. He was a ranger again, and rangers never surrender. From behind his cover, Frank's mind was racing through tactical options with the clarity of a much younger man. The leader still had the rifle, which meant he had superior firepower at range. But rifles are designed for medium to long-distance engagement. In close quarters, they become unwieldy clubs. The key was closing distance and forcing the fight into the kind of hand-to-hand combat where Frank's training would overcome any advantage the younger man might have in strength or speed. The bank lobby had become a battlefield, and Frank Morrison was the only one present who truly understood the rules of that particular game. As sirens began wailing in the distance, Frank knew he had minutes at most before police arrived. But minutes were an eternity in combat time, and he had work to finish. 3 men had entered his bank with weapons and the intention to harm innocent people. As far as Staff Sergeant Frank Morrison was concerned, only one of them was walking out alive, and it wasn't going to be any of the robbers.